next type of force we'll talk about is called a London dispersion force. And this is named after a man by the name of Fritz London, so it has nothing to do with the city of London. Basically, the London dispersion force is due to a temporary uneven distribution of electrons around a nucleus. So we can see here in this example a helium atom. So helium's got two electrons. And on average, they're going to be on opposite sides of the, or evenly distributed around the helium atom. However, like once in a while, by random chance, both electrons can be on the same side. And then what happens is that when two electrons are on the same side, this forms a dipole across the atom. And then electrons from another helium atom are attracted to that dipole. So the positive side is attracted to the negative side, and this actually moves the electrons in the next atom over, and then this causes essentially a chain reaction where it pulls electrons on a third atom and so on. So this happens across like if you have a helium balloon, say, this is going to be happening to all of the helium molecules in the balloon. They're going to be having this weak attraction. Now, again, this is very weak, so it doesn't stay this way. They'll be constantly broken and reformed, and so if the electron moves out of the way, it'll break the bond so that they're on opposite sides, and then it might reform again. So essentially, because it's due to this random movement of electrons, it is a very weak force, and it seems surprising that it would even have an effect, but it does. In fact, all atoms and molecules have a London dispersion force. But they play a relatively small role compared to dipole-dipole, ion-dipole, and hydrogen bonds. However, in nonpolar molecules, these are the only forces holding the molecules together. London dispersion forces that are one of these properties that depends on the size of the atom. So larger atoms tend to have a greater London dispersion force because the electrons are further from the nucleus, and since they don't feel the pull on the nucleus so much, they can rearrange themselves more easily. So if we look at the noble gases, the boiling point of the noble gas basically increases with the size of the gas, and the reason for this is like xenon, which is very large, has the electrons quite far out, and so they can easily be redistributed across the atom. And then basically what this means is we have a fairly strong London dispersion force that holds the, basically attracts the xenon atoms to one another. So that means it has a relatively high boiling point. Now by high, 165, this is the Kelvin scale, which we didn't talk a lot about. You'll talk about it more if you take Chem 102. But this is still well below the freezing point of water, so all noble gases are gases at room temperature, but they do have a very large difference in boiling point. Helium is just barely above absolute zero is its boiling point, so that absolute zero is the lowest temperature it can get to at 0 Kelvin. At only 4 degrees Kelvin, helium is a gas. And that's all due to the fact that helium has very, very weak London dispersion force, so there's not much holding it together at all. But the reason it isn't zero is because it does have a little bit of a London dispersion force that is an attractive force between the atoms. And now we're going to summarize the different types of intermolecular forces. Now, all of these forces are due to attraction between positive and negative charges. But the only difference is the nature of the charges. So we have the first type is a hydrogen bond, which is an interaction between molecules that have either an HF, HO, or HN dipole. So this is the strongest bond and it's a bond that's found in water and holds water molecules together. And for this reason, it's extremely important because water plays such an important role in biological systems and in all other kinds of other processes on Earth. The next type of intermolecular force we're going to talk about is the ion-dipole interaction. And this is due to an ion, such as an ion from an ionic compound, and the dipole moment of a polar molecule. So it can be any polar molecule. So we have a picture here of water, which is a polar molecule, interacting with a salt crystal, and it causing the salt crystal to dissolve because the ions within the crystal start interacting with water instead of with each other. So this is a pretty strong interaction, not quite as strong as a hydrogen bond, but it's strong enough, and in fact it's strong enough that it can, the water molecules are happy to interact with the ion rather than with themselves. The next type of interaction is a dipole-dipole force, and this is an interaction of dipole moments between polar molecules, and it includes all of those except the ones that are HF, HO, or HN bonds. So basically, the hydrogen bond is kind of a special case of a dipole force, a very strong one, but other dipole forces are not as strong, so they have intermediate attraction, and the amount of attraction can vary depending on the nature of the bonds and how polar the bond is. And then the fourth type of interaction is a London dispersion force, which is due to the uneven distribution of electrons across an atom, which is a fleeting occurrence, but does actually have an effect on how atoms interact with each other, and also how molecules interact, because within molecules too, like an uneven distribution of electrons causes London dispersion force of attraction. This is a weak force, weaker than any of the others, but it still does have an effect. In particular, in nonpolar molecules, this is the only thing holding the molecules together. Okay. Intermolecular forces play a couple of different roles in the behavior of matter. Number one, the stronger the intermolecular force, the more tightly the atoms or molecules stick together. So basically, if they stick together, this translates directly into a higher melting and boiling point. So water, for example, has a relatively high melting and boiling point compared to other small molecules because it's got very strong hydrogen bonds holding it together. So this has a huge impact. Carbon dioxide, which has weak intermolecular forces, is a gas at room temperature. So in other words, it has a lower boiling and melting point because it's got weaker forces holding the molecules together. The other impact that intermolecular forces have is they basically dictate what things are going to mix together or not. So it's because of intermolecular forces that oil and water don't mix. So oil, well, on the top in this salad dressing here, is a nonpolar molecule, and water is a polar molecule. And if you shake them up, you can get them briefly to mix together, but they will quickly separate. Now, why is this? Like, an excellent visual is to think of magnetic marbles and non-magnetic ordinary glass marbles. So if you put a bunch of magnetic marbles and glass ones together, like say in a pan or something, and then tilt the pan to mix them up, the magnetic marbles will very quickly attract each other, and they'll basically join all together, and they will exclude the glass marbles, which don't have this attraction. So this is exactly what happens in the oil and water. The water molecules attract each other like magnets and essentially exclude the oil molecules, which aren't able to attract be water molecules. So this has a huge impact, again, on biology. So, for example, cells have a cell membrane that's kind of like the oil that acts as a barrier and keeps the cell contents, which are in a aqueous or water-based medium, inside. Okay, now we're going to look at the intermolecular forces present in each of the following substances, just so you can get an idea of, start thinking about what is present in these molecules. And when you look at this information, then you have a better idea of how these molecules will behave. So NH3, or ammonia, so it has a NH bond. This is one of the bonds that is a hydrogen bond, so it has a hydrogen bond, but it also has London dispersion forces, because absolutely all atoms and molecules, all compounds, will have this type of interaction. However, the hydrogen bond in this case is much stronger and is going to play a much larger role in the behavior of ammonia. So hydrogen sulfide, so HS, that is not, sulfur isn't nitrogen, hydrogen, or nitrogen, fluorine, or oxygen, so it's not a hydrogen bond. However, it is a dipole-dipole bond. And again, H2S has a London dispersion force, so you can always put that down as a type of interaction that's going to occur. CH4, or methane, it's got a carbon-hydrogen bond, but if we remember, this is the hydrogens are, it's a polar bond, but the hydrogens are evenly distributed around the carbon. So this only has a London dispersion force. That's the only force holding it together. So methane is a gas at room temperature because it's got this only this weak force holding the molecules together. And then we have CH3OH, or methanol. And the OH, we have oxygen directly bonded to hydrogen, so this is a hydrogen bond, and it also has a London dispersion force. So methanol is a liquid at room temperature. And then if we have magnesium chloride dissolved in water, so this is a salt. When it dissolves, it's going to form ions, and water has a dipole moment on it, so this is an ion dipole bond. And of course, it also has the London dispersion force. And I just also want to point out, like, the behavior of these things and how it's affected by the intermolecular forces. So ammonia and hydrogen sulfide are both soluble in water because they have a dipole moment across them, and so is methanol. Whereas the CH4, or methane, is only poorly soluble because it's basically nonpolar and does not have it only has London dispersion force and doesn't have a dipole moment across it. Intermolecular forces are particularly important in large molecules, and shown here is trypsin, which is a digestive enzyme found in your stomach to digest proteins. But basically it has this very complex shape, but it's a very specific shape and has to have exactly the shape in order to function. And the shape is dictated by hydrogen bonds and other types of intermolecular forces between the different parts of the molecule. So even though it's within the molecule, like, different parts, since it's so large, are attracted to each other by intermolecular forces, and it plays a very important role. If we did not have these forces, the enzyme could not exist as it does and would not be able to function. And then I'll just end by saying that geckos use an intermolecular force on the pads of their feet. They have these projections, and they form intermolecular forces that help them attract to surfaces. So if you've seen a gecko climbing the wall of a cage. That's how it can do it.